Thank you so much for inviting me tonight. It's really great to see people here. I think that the most important thing when we're starting to talk about how we challenge some of this agenda is that we are people with a vision, aren't we? Not only of what is wrong with early years education and primary education, but also the kind of vision we want to see in our schools, the kind of life that we want children to have when they come into our settings, into our schools. And I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about some of what I think that vision kind of looks like, and why we developed the Charter for Primary Education, which I will give out on the way out. We've produced a pamphlet which Richard's got an article in, and has the actual charter printed on the inside as well. And what we've kind of aimed to do with it is to lay out some of the fundamental principles that we think should exist in our education system, and so not just to talk about the things that we're against, but also about positively what are we for. And the first, I just want to highlight some of those really. The first one is that to really properly learn, children need a lot of time, don't they? They need time to develop, and not just to develop, whether they can decode some words on a page or whether they know their letter sounds, but to develop physically, to develop emotionally, and all of those things, which is why it's so appalling when you hear Liz Truss, was it last year, when she talked about how we need children to be able to sit still with their legs crossed on the carpet, listening to their teacher so that they are ready for school. And you just think, what kind of a system is it where we talk about getting children ready for school rather than making sure that our schools are ready for the children that come into them, and starting to look at it like that. So they need that time. They need time to develop. They need time to consolidate the things that they've learned. We know that it's not a linear process like this that just builds up gradually over time. We know that children might spend a long, long time on a particular activity, maybe in the sand, maybe in the water. They're repeating it over and over again, maybe in order to really consolidate the things that they've learned. They need time to investigate. They need time to experience things. They need time to experiment in their own terms, on their own and in their own ways. Which is why when Ofsted came to my school and said to one of the teachers there, well, it wasn't quite an outstanding lesson. She's an amazing art teacher, because actually one of the children was sat there for about 5 minutes and he was looking at the page. And you thought, well, what makes a really good art lesson? Of course, you want that child to have a bit of time to think about what he might be putting down on the page. Of course, she said, but look what he produced at the end. But that's not really what they're interested in, is those little measurable chunks of learning that they that they can see. So time to play. And I think when we talk about play, it's quite difficult sometimes, isn't it, for people, maybe perhaps parents and things, who don't work with children day in, day out, and they hear all of the quite backward stuff about what children should be doing, sitting down, learning, to explain to them. I think we need lots and lots of explaining about why it is that play is so important. It's not just that they're running around doing whatever they want and it's all very nice. It is the absolute fundamental basis of how children work, and they're busy, they're doing their work. Older children might be sat down doing a piece of writing. Younger children are doing their work when they're at play, and they're exhausted at the end of the day because they have been working so hard at their play all day. And you counterpose that again to Truss and her idea of our nation of unruly toddlers running round our nurseries with no sense of purpose. I don't know if she's ever met a toddler, but that's kind of what they're supposed to do, isn't it? We talk about key skills. Yes, key skills. We want children to learn to read and to write and all of those things. But where does it start? It starts with really solidly being able to communicate, speech and listening. This, by the way, they've removed from the national curriculum now for primary education. There was a strand called speaking and listening. So, it used to be, nobody put that much importance on it, but at least you could justify a lot of what you did, saying, well, I'm developing their skills in these areas. It's been replaced with something called spoken English, and you can imagine what that means. It's much more about the sort of formal presentation to your peers and stuff like that, not about those fundamental skills, really, of communication, and also not necessarily in English. Why, if our children come to school speaking all sorts of different languages, that is really brilliant, and they should be encouraged to speak those languages and to speak and to learn in English as well. The fostering of a love of books, we have to get this message across to people, don't we, about why that is so important, that we can't just teach reading through decoding little chunks of sounds and how they coordinate to the letters on the page. Children need to know that books have meaning, that there's a story in there. They need to enjoy the pictures and the excitement of turning the page and wondering what it is that happens next. And I've taught in the past, not now, something when I first started teaching. It was called RML. It's now called Read, Write, Inc. And they start that in reception. Developed by somebody called Ruth Miskin, whose books are all decodable, so there's no words in there that would not be decodable for a child, and they have on every other page a picture about so big. What kind of excitement and joy is a child ever going to get from reading a book like that every day as well? They would have to read that, and once they can do it fluently, then you might give them another book that's very much the same. But also that education is about more than that. I think we have to sell this vision that it's about fundamentally how we live as a society, the way that we treat each other. I think human rights, democracy, mutual respect, and all of those things. We want all of that to be embedded in our education system, not just for the early years actually, but right through to secondary school and beyond, because those are the things that make really good citizens and really good learners, and that set them up for the future. So we have a huge task about how we get there, because actually everything that has happened, not just under this government actually, but I think everything that was introduced under the last government in education was, in terms of curriculum, was often a very retrograde step really. So we have to think about how we get there, and it's a big task. I think the first thing is about getting all of the different campaigns and organisations and interested people together to start to thrash through, okay, what ideas have we got, what skills have we got, what knowledge have we got, and what kind of activities do we want to do. So when we first thought about setting up the Charter for Primary Education, I had no idea that there were all these other organisations around, the Too Much Too Soon, Early Years Action, all of those. So one of the things that's been brilliant is getting to know people like Richard, working alongside them, how can we work together, and all of that kind of thing. The other thing is, I think we have to have a real confidence, especially practitioners, that actually we are the experts. We work with children every day, we know their needs, and we need to be trusted to teach them and to help them with their learning. And actually it's quite difficult when you've got a system that is constantly undermining the professional nature of our jobs. Constantly it is the teachers, the practitioners that are the problem. They're not up to scratch, they're not good enough. You have that policed by Ofsted, who I think are a huge driver of the kind of pushing all of those pressures right down into the early years. And I think partly we have to have a campaign about a completely different inspectorate system, maybe where schools and nurseries would coordinate with each other, would maybe talk to each other, cooperate. We have a competitive system instead, don't we, where people compete to get kids into their nursery rather than cooperating together. It just seems absolutely mad. I think events obviously like this are so important because we need to spread the word, we need to involve other people. So one of the things that we did in conjunction with with Richard in particular for the Too Much Too Soon was we held a seminar in Parliament specifically on early years with some different MPs, teachers, academics, anyone with a kind of interest that came. And I think that was part of trying to build that broader alliance that we need. We need quite a broad alliance, don't we? That's wherever there's someone with an interest in this area is to try to pull them together, not necessarily under a big umbrella or whatever, but certainly, I'd like to see a kind of national education campaign. Really, that would be excellent. I think there is loads we can do in the run up to the election actually, because I think education will be in the spotlight, and it would be a crime if we allowed the official politicians to sort of set the educational debate on their terms, because it's always such a rubbish debate, isn't it? It's always about like who's going to beat teachers up most, who's going to say that our schools are worse, who's going to say, well, we're going to sort out this rubbish lot, you know, the most, really. And it would be really good to start to try to wrestle some of that back and say, actually, we have a vision for how education should look. We're really positive about it. We're really confident about it, and start to sell it. So one of the things that we're doing is we're going to hold, it's interesting to hear you talk about your Brighton manifesto, because we're going to have a discussion about some kind of primary manifesto that we can start to sort of, so it would be brilliant actually if people want to come along on the 8th of November in London, just to try and maybe get a few people and to feed some of that in. That would be absolutely brilliant. And finally, I just wanted to end on Richard's point about non-compliance, because, you know, the problem is that people that work in this area often know what's wrong, but it's so difficult, isn't it, when you've got to do it, because that's the job. If you don't do it, you're out, kind of thing. And I think that we need to start to ramp up the idea of a campaign about principled non-compliance, with particularly the baseline assessments. Can you imagine when children come into reception and they've never been to school before, some of them have never been to nursery or anything, they've been at home, they come in and within 2 weeks of being there, they are asked to write something down or sit down at it's abusive actually to children. And I think that up and down the country, reception teachers are horrified at the prospect of forcing children within the first 2 weeks of school to sit through that. So there is a motion that's been written for NUT conference, for the National Union of Teachers conference, that now starts to talk about not just looking into but moving towards boycott of those tests. Who knows whether it get on the agenda. We hope that lots of NUT branches will prioritise it and stuff, but we hope that that will form a bit of a basis for raising some of this stuff as well. So I think there's quite a lot of opportunities, if you like, to raise some of this. So thanks for inviting me.